The horse knew the way home. That was what the stable boys had said 12 years ago when the animal returned alone to Ashenwind's gates with mud caked to its flanks and a blood-stained signet ring looped around the saddle pommel. The Duke of Ashenwind, young Calder Valor, had ridden out to war and never come back. His ring had. His horse had. He had not. Now the duchy was dying in his absence. Alaric Fenro first heard the name Ashenwind on a cold October road in the hills south of Bryn Mawr, 3 days after he had left the last posting house behind, and 2 days after he had begun to suspect the autumn was conspiring against him personally. Rain came sideways. The road turned to soup. His horse, a patient gray named Cobb, picked his way through the ruts with the philosophical calm of an animal that had endured worse. He heard the shouting before he saw the coach. It sat canted at an angle in a ditch, where the road narrowed between 2 stands of black-trunked oak. 3 men on horseback had positioned themselves at the tree line, and a 4th had dragged an elderly priest down from the coach's step and was pressing a knife to the old man's throat while demanding, in a voice that suggested he had made this demand several times already, that the strongbox be thrown down. Alaric was a practical man. He had been a cavalry captain for 11 years and a wanderer for 3. He assessed the situation, counted the odds, noted the angle of light, and charged. It was not a complicated plan. Cobb's shoulder caught the man with the knife square in the back and sent him sprawling. Alaric was off the saddle before the other 3 had time to organize a response, and by the time they did, he had put 2 of them on the ground, and the 3rd had decided his share of whatever was in that strongbox was not worth a broken nose. The priest was sitting in the mud, unhurt but thoroughly shaken, when Alaric helped him up. "Thank you," the old man managed. "Thank you, my son. I confess I had begun to compose my final prayers. A fortunate thing you didn't finish them." Alaric retrieved the fallen knife from the road and tossed it into the ditch. "Are you injured?" "My dignity, nothing more." The priest brushed at his robes, then stopped. He was staring at Alaric with an expression that moved through surprise into something that looked unsettlingly like awe. His lined face had gone pale. "Good Lord," he said quietly. "Good Lord in heaven." Alaric became still. "Father?" The priest stepped forward. He was not a tall man, but he moved with a certainty that made Alaric stay where he was. The old man reached up and touched the side of Alaric's jaw, just beneath the ear, where an old saber cut had left a curved white scar, half the length of a finger. "Where did you get this?" the priest whispered. "A skirmish in the Eastern Campaign, 9 years ago." Alaric pulled back slightly. "Why?" The priest sat down heavily on the coach step, though it was still half in the ditch. He looked at Alaric as though he were looking at a ghost. Then slowly he began to speak. His name was Father Colin, and he had served the Valor family for 30 years. He had baptized both of the old duke's children. He had read the mass at the old duke's funeral 4 months past. He had ridden south that morning from the duchy's seat at Ashenmere on a private errand he declined to name, and he had been robbed, and now he sat in a muddy ditch staring at a stranger who wore the face of a dead man. "The Duke of Ashenwind," Father Colin said, "had a scar exactly there. Exactly that shape. His horse returned with his ring 12 years ago, and no one ever found the body. You are the image of him. Not a resemblance, my son. The image." Alaric Fenro had no duchy and no title and no particular destination. He had 34 years of life behind him, most of it military, some of it wandering, none of it noble. He had been born, as far as he knew, in the village of Fenro in the northern provinces, raised by a blacksmith's family, and had entered the cavalry at 19. "I am not your duke," he said. "No," Father Colin agreed. "But 30,000 people are about to lose their homes unless someone is." Father Colin told the story over 2 hours in the coaching inn at Bryn Mawr, while rain hammered the shuttered windows, and Alaric sat across from him with his hands around a cup he had stopped drinking from some time ago. The Duchy of Ashenwind had been prosperous once. Good farmland, productive forests, 3 market towns, and a castle at Ashenmere that was more library than fortress, but no less beautiful for it. Old Duke Vetherick had been a fair man, his 2 children his greatest pride. His son Calder had gone to war with the crown's cavalry and distinguished himself. His daughter Seraphine had remained at home, managing the estate with a competence that astonished everyone who had expected to find a decorative girl, and found instead a young woman who understood crop rotation, labor costs, and the precise weight of a duchy's obligations. When Calder disappeared, everything began to slide. The old duke's grief corroded his judgment. A steward named Lord Oswin Driven, who had always been trusted, stepped into the vacuum left by the duke's despair and began, quietly, to shape things to his advantage. Rents misapplied, accounts rewritten, contracts extended to Dreven's chosen merchants at prices that enriched Dreven and impoverished Ashenwind. Then the old duke died. Seraphine had fought to hold things together. She was clever and determined, and the tenants loved her, but she had no title and no legal authority. 3 false claimants had already arrived claiming to be the returned Calder Valor. All 3 had been exposed within days, one of them violently. The duchy's debts had become insurmountable. A month ago the crown had sent a letter. Unless the rightful Duke of Ashenwind appeared to assume his title within 30 days, the estate would be dissolved and divided among 4 neighboring lords, none of whom had any interest in the duchy's people. 30,000 souls would lose their homes, their livelihoods, their community. 26 days remained. "I need a man who looks like him," Father Collins said, "long enough to satisfy the crown's representative, who arrives in 26 days for the formal confirmation of title. Long enough to sign the documents that will discharge the debts and secure the duchy's charter. And then? And then you confess the deception to Lady Seraphine, who will find a legal path. She is very clever about legal paths, and the duchy survives." Alaric set down his cup. "You want me to commit fraud against the crown. I want you to save 30,000 people." The silence between them was long. Outside, the rain intensified. "The lady," Alaric said. "You said she exposed the other claimants." "She did. She'll expose me?" "Perhaps," Father Collins said. "Perhaps not." The others knew nothing of Calder. They were opportunists who had heard a rumor. "You will have time on the road to Ashenmere for me to tell you everything I know about him, which is considerable." He paused. "And there is the face, the scar. She will want to believe, my son. She has been fighting alone for 12 years. Alaric thought about 30,000 people. He thought about the villages he had passed through in his 3 years of wandering, the places that had been carved up by powerful men who saw land and not lives. He thought about the blacksmith who had raised him, who had worked himself gray keeping a household of 5 fed, and who had understood without being told that power belonged to those who used it carefully. "I'll need 3 days with you before we reach the castle," he said. Father Collins smiled for the first time. "I have brought every letter Calder ever wrote home." Ashenmere rose from the morning mist like a piece of a dream that had refused to finish. It was not a martial castle. The curtain wall was low and the towers were elegant rather than intimidating, and someone in the last century had planted climbing roses along the south face that had grown to cover half the stonework in dark autumn canes. The village below it was quiet but alive. Smoke from chimneys, a blacksmith's ring, 2 children who stopped their game to watch the approaching riders. Alaric felt the weight of what he was doing settle properly onto his shoulders for the first time. He was wearing Calder Valor's signet ring, which Father Colin had kept for 12 years against the possibility of this moment. It felt heavier than its actual weight. The gates opened before they reached them. Word had traveled ahead. It always did in small places, and by the time they rode into the courtyard, there were perhaps 40 servants and retainers gathered to watch, and the silence was the particular kind that forms around a moment that has been anticipated so long it has become almost mythological. She was standing at the top of the steps. Seraphine Valor was 30 years old, and had the look of someone who had spent the last decade doing two people's work. She was dark-haired, pale, dressed in a riding coat that had seen better seasons, and she stood with the stillness of a woman who had learned that composure was the most useful weapon available to her. Her eyes found Alaric the moment he dismounted, and whatever she had expected, he saw it collide with whatever she actually saw, and her face did something complicated for just a moment before going still again. He climbed the steps. He had planned what to say. Father Colin had drilled him, but when he reached the top and looked at her, the prepared words scattered. "My lady," he said, "I am sorry it took so long." Her jaw tightened. "You have been gone 12 years. Yes. 3 men have stood where you stand now and claimed the same identity. All 3 were liars." "I know." Her eyes moved to the scar beneath his jaw. They stayed there for a moment. "You'll come inside," she said. "We have a great deal to discuss." The household watched them go in. The first test came that evening. Seraphine arranged it with the precision of someone who had done this before. She seated Alaric at the head of the long table in the hall, the Duke's chair, which no one had used in 12 years, and placed around him 4 people who had known Calder Valor intimately. The elderly housekeeper who had managed the castle since before either sibling was born, the head groom who had trained Calder to ride, a neighboring baron who had been Calder's particular friend in childhood, and Father Colin, who sat at the far end of the table with his hands folded and his expression neutral. Alaric had spent 3 days preparing. He answered what he could, deflected what he couldn't, and let silence do its work where neither answer nor deflection seemed right. He spoke of things Father Colin had described in careful detail. He asked quietly about the old Duke's illness, because grief is easier to speak of than memory, when memory is the thing you're pretending to have. When the housekeeper wept, he reached across and covered her hand with his and said nothing, because Father Colin had told him that Calder Valor had never used words when silence would serve. Later, when the others had gone, Seraphine remained. She sat across the table from him with a candle between them, and the light moved in the draught from the high windows, and she looked at him for a long time without speaking. "You couldn't remember the name of the dog we had when you were 14, she said. "No?" "Bram told me you remembered the name of his horse from when you were boys." "Some things stay." He held her gaze. "Others don't. I spent years trying to understand which was which." "Where have you been?" He told her the story Father Colin had constructed. A head wound, months of confusion, years of trying to recover what had been lost, the gradual rebuilding of self from fragments. It was not an implausible story. He had heard similar ones from men who had come back from the Eastern Campaign with their names still attached, but their selves misplaced. Seraphine listened. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then, "You may stay," she said. "The duchy needs you. The Crown's representative arrives in 23 days. And you?" Her expression was careful. "I need more time." He threw himself into it. This was not calculation, or rather, it was not only calculation. Alaric had spent 11 years in the cavalry, learning that the fastest way to understand a situation was to work it from the ground up, talk to the soldiers, not the officers, walk the perimeter, not the map. He applied this to Ashenwind. He rose before dawn. He visited the farms and the mill and the 3 market towns, and he listened. What he found appalled him. The estates were not merely in debt. They had been methodically hollowed out. Roads that had once been maintained were rutted to uselessness. Granaries that should have held reserves were half empty. Tenant contracts that he found in the estate's records had been quietly revised over a decade to extract more rent for less security. When he traced the revisions, he spent 3 evenings in the estate office going through papers while Seraphine watched from across the room. Almost everyone led back to Lord Oswin Dreven. Dreven himself was a smooth man of 50, with the face of someone who had spent a lifetime in rooms where important things happened. He was polite, informative, and consistently present at the exact moments when he should not have been. Alaric did not confront him. He made notes instead. On the fourth day, he helped repair a bridge that had been waiting for repair for 3 years because the contractor Dreven had retained had taken the advance payment and never appeared. On the fifth day, he sat with a struggling farmer named Galt and worked out, using the ledgers Seraphine brought him, that Galt's rent had been incorrectly calculated for 7 years and that the duchy owed him more than he owed it. On the sixth day, he told the housekeeper that the kitchen staff were to have their Sunday afternoons free, which had apparently not been the case under Drevan's management of the household. The villagers began to talk about him. Seraphine began to watch him differently. He noticed this and said nothing about it, because he was increasingly aware of something he had not anticipated. He was coming to like this place. Not in the abstract way he had liked places he passed through, but in the specific, particular way that a person likes something that is beginning to feel, against all reason, like his. And he was coming to like her. Which was a different problem entirely. She came to find him on the 8th evening, carrying a lamp through the east wing of the castle toward the older section where the family's private rooms were. He was in the corridor, reading a series of faded inscriptions above a door that had been sealed. "That door hasn't been opened in my lifetime," she said. "What's behind it?" "The old chapel. My father had it sealed after my mother died. He couldn't bear to go in." Alaric touched the edge of the door. The wood was old, and the seal was wax, gray, and crumbled. "Your mother. When did she die?" "I was 2. I barely knew her." Seraphine's voice was steady. "She died in childbirth. The child did not survive." He looked at her. Something in the matter-of-fact way she said it suggested the kind of sorrow that has been lived with so long it is worn smooth. "I'm sorry," he said. It was not a performed sentiment. He meant it. "You never spoke of her," Seraphine said. "Even before you left. Father kept everything of hers in that room, and you never asked about her." "Perhaps I should have." She looked at him for a long moment. "You're different," she said finally. It was not an accusation. It was almost a question. 12 years change a person. 12 years, she agreed, or something else. She held the lamp up slightly, studying his face. Then she turned and walked back down the corridor, and he stayed where he was, looking at the sealed door. He found the first letter on the 11th day. It was tucked inside the estate ledger for the year of Calder Valor's disappearance, folded small and sealed with plain wax, addressed in a careful hand to no name at all. Just a symbol. A hollow circle with a line through it. He brought it to Father Colin, who had stayed on at the castle on the pretext of pastoral duties, and watched the old priest go still. "Where did you find this?" "The estate archive, behind the ledger for the 12th year." Father Colin unfolded the letter and read it. His face aged 10 years in 10 seconds. "This is Calder's hand," he said quietly. The letter was short, written in haste. It spoke of a discovery, accounts that did not add up, payments that had no legitimate source, a name that appeared again and again in connection with those payments. The Hollow King. The letter said, "If I do not return from the eastern border in time to lay this before the Crown's auditor, find what I have found and carry it forward." It was dated 2 weeks before Calder's disappearance. "He knew," Alaric said. "He suspected." Father Colin set the letter down carefully. "He left this as a safeguard. Dreven found out he suspected. That would seem to be the implication." Alaric said nothing for a moment, then, "What did Dreven do with him?" "I don't know." Father Colin looked at him over the letter. "But this letter suggests he didn't simply have him killed. If he had, why go to the trouble of the ambush, the ring, the horse, returned without a body? Killing a duke without disposing of the body creates questions. Killing him and making him disappear. Creates a ghost, Alaric said. An open question. A hope that keeps the duchy from passing to anyone else, while Drevenham continues to manage it. Yes. Alaric picked up the letter. He read it again. He thought about a man who had discovered corruption and written down a safeguard and ridden toward the border and had not come back. He thought, not for the first time, about the fact that he didn't know where he himself had come from. His adopted family in Fenro had told him he'd been found, a foundling, brought by a passing tinker who'd been paid to deliver him and said nothing useful about his origins. He had a birthmark on his left shoulder, crescent-shaped, that no one in his adopted family shared. He set the thought aside. There was too much to do. Over the next 4 days, working in the evenings after the castle had gone quiet, he and Seraphine mapped what Draven had done. She had suspected, she told him. She had tried twice to petition the Crown's auditors and had been turned away each time by administrative obstacles she now recognized as Dreven's interference. I couldn't prove it, she said on the second evening of their investigation. They were sitting side by side at the estate office table, papers spread before them, 2 candles burning down. I had the feeling of it, the pattern of it, but no one was going to listen to a woman with suspicions and no title. They'll listen now. She looked at him sideways. They were close enough that he could see the weariness in her face and the anger under the weariness, and under that, something quieter. Will they? She said. It was not quite a question. I'll make them. You're very certain. I'm very angry, he corrected. It looks similar. She made a sound that was almost a laugh. He found he was inordinately pleased by it. On the 14th day, one of the tunnels opened itself. This was not supernatural. The castle was old and had been built in stages, and the lower cellars connected to an older network of service passages that no one had mapped in living memory. A section of wall in the south cellar had begun to weep damp over the past weeks, and when Alaric pressed against it to examine the moisture damage, a section swung inward. He took a lamp. He went alone, which was not wise, but Seraphine was in the middle of a necessary meeting with the duchy's remaining solicitor, and he didn't want to wait. The tunnel ran south for perhaps 200 yards beneath the castle's foundations, past a collapsed section that required crawling, through a chamber that smelled of old smoke and long disuse, and ended at a door that was locked from the outside. On the floor of the chamber, he found a wooden chest. Inside the chest, letters, ledger pages, and one document in a hand he did not recognize, headed with the hollow circle symbol that described in clinical detail an arrangement between a person called H.K., the Hollow King, and a network of financial agents stretching from the duchy to 3 capital trading houses. 15 years of fraud, documented by the person who had committed it, in the manner of someone who kept records as insurance. Dreven's name appeared 17 times. Alaric carried the chest back through the tunnel. He found Seraphine in the corridor outside the cellar door, lamp in hand, and her expression told him she had been waiting there for some time. You went down alone, she said. I did. That was foolish. It was. He held up the chest, but worthwhile. She set her lamp down on the floor, opened the chest, read in silence for 3 minutes. When she looked up, her face had undergone a series of changes that resolved into a cold, precise fury he found genuinely impressive. He's been here, she said, the whole time. Living in this house, managing my family's affairs, eating at our table. She paused. I want him arrested. Not yet. Why not yet? Because if we arrest him before we know the full extent of the network, every financial agent between here and the capital will have time to destroy their records. We have 15 days before the Crown's representative arrives. He met her eyes. We need to know where the real money went, and we need to know what happened to your brother. The word dropped between them. She was very still. To Calder, she said. To Calder. You said your brother. I know what I said. She looked at him for a long time, and he looked back, and neither of them said anything, and the candles moved in the draft from the tunnel opening. What are you? She asked finally, not accusing, genuinely asking. I don't entirely know, he said, but I am trying to do right by this place. That much is true. She picked up her lamp. Tell me the rest tomorrow, she said. Tonight I need to think. The chapel door was opened on the 16th day. Alaric did it himself, at dawn, with a crowbar from the stables and the knowledge that whatever was inside had been sealed for nearly 30 years. Seraphine stood behind him with her arms folded and her jaw set, in the manner of someone who had decided to do a frightening thing and was not going to let herself stop. The room was small and cold. A stone altar, a window of colored glass through which the early light came stained green and gold, and on the altar, wrapped in oilcloth that had kept it dry through 3 decades, a leather journal. Seraphine recognized it before he picked it up. That's my mother's writing, she said very quietly. He brought it to the estate office, and they read it together, side by side, at the table where they had spent so many evenings. The journal was not a daily record. It was a confession, written in the last months of the Duchess Ilara's life, addressed to no one and everyone. A private accounting made by a woman who knew she was dying and could not go without leaving the truth behind. Ilara Valor had given birth to twins. The second birth had been attended only by a midwife in secret, at the insistence of a man the journal named only as O.D., initials that required no interpretation by this point. The midwife had told the Duke that the second infant had died. This was not true. The infant had been taken, removed from the castle on a cold November night in the first year of the Duke's marriage, delivered to a tinker who was paid to carry him north and place him with a family. Ilara had spent the rest of her short life not knowing where her second son was. She wrote, I hear him sometimes, in my sleep, a healthy cry. I cannot explain how I know he is alive. I know only that he is. The journal described both infants. The first, Calder, had a birthmark on his right shoulder, a small crescent shape. The second had the same mark, mirrored on his left. Alaric had set his lamp down very carefully. He was sitting very still. May I see your shoulder? Seraphine said. He turned away from her and pulled his shirt from his shoulder. The silence was absolute. He could hear her breathing. Left shoulder, she said. Yes. Crescent-shaped. Yes. Another silence. Then she made a sound. Not quite a word, not quite a cry. And when he turned back, she was sitting with her hands over her face, and her shoulders were shaking, and after a moment she let her hands drop. Her eyes were bright. You're not an imposter, she said. No. You never were. No. Calder is alive, she said. It was not a question. It was the shape of a possibility as she was only now daring to hold. If O.D. had the midwife take you away, if he feared what you might become, he would not have killed Calder either. Too many questions. He would have. Hidden him? Alaric said. Somewhere no one would look. We have 11 days. Then we need to move quickly. The document from the tunnel chest had named 3 properties associated with the Hollow Kings network. 2 were trading houses in the capital. The third was a fortress in the northern hills called Greyvane, described in the accounts simply as a holding facility for items requiring long-term secure storage. The language had the bloodless quality of a ledger line that does not want to describe what it is actually describing. Alaric told Seraphine before they left where they were going and why. He told her everything, not in the desperate manner of a man confessing a crime, but in the steady manner of a man who has decided that the truth, whatever it costs, is the only foundation worth building on. I came here as an imposter, he said. I agreed to it because Father Colin convinced me that people would suffer otherwise, and he was right about that, and I won't pretend it was wrong to come. But I am not Calder Valor. I was born the same night to the same mother, and the same blood runs in both of us, but I have no memories of this place, and I don't have the legal right to the title. I have the birthmark and the face and whatever this is." He gestured, awkwardly, at the space between them. Seraphine looked at him for a long time. "You could have said nothing," she said. "The Crown's representative would have arrived, confirmed you as the Duke, and you could have held the title legitimately. Your birth gives you that right. Calder's right comes first. He's been gone 12 years. He was put there by Dreven. That doesn't make it his choice." She was quiet. "You're an extraordinary man," she said finally. "I'm a man who doesn't know what to do with himself," he said honestly. "I just know what not to do." They rode north with 4 men they trusted, the head groom, and 3 of the estate's old guard and Father Colin, who insisted on coming with the unassailable calm of a man who has already survived robbery once this month. The journey to Greyvane took 2 days through country that became increasingly spare and stony as the hills rose. On the second night, they camped under a limestone overhang while rain slanted through the dark, and Seraphine sat close to the fire and said, without looking at him, "Are you afraid?" "Yes," Alaric said. "Of what, specifically?" "Of what he'll be. 12 years is a long time to be held somewhere against your will. A man can come out of that broken or hard or—" He stopped. "Or he might come out himself," Seraphine said. "Or that." She was quiet for a moment. "I used to imagine him coming back," she said. "In the first years, I'd hear a horse in the courtyard and my heart would—" She didn't finish the sentence. "I stopped imagining it, eventually. It was easier." "What did you do with the hope?" "I put it into the duchy, into the people. If I couldn't have my brother back, I would protect what he would have protected." He looked at her in the firelight. "You're an extraordinary woman," he said. She met his eyes. "I'm a woman who is very tired," she said, "and very glad you came." He said nothing, but he reached across and briefly covered her hand with his, as he had done for the housekeeper at the table on his first night, only this time. When she turned her hand and held his, he did not pull back. Greyvane was a grey tower on a grey hill in the grey morning, a place built for obscurity rather than defense. They came to it in the early fog of the 3rd day, and Alaric went in first with the head groom and 2 of the guard, while the others waited in the trees. The place was not heavily manned. 4 guards, who were more accustomed to maintaining a prison than defending against a determined party of 6. The fight, such as it was, lasted less than 5 minutes. Alaric found himself, at the end of it, standing at the door of a low-ceilinged room deep in the tower's base, with a lamp in his hand and his heart doing something complex and unprecedented. He pushed the door open. The man inside was sitting on a bench, with the alert, wary stillness of someone who had learned not to react to the sound of approaching footsteps. He was lean and weathered and hollow-eyed, and he was 34 years old, and he had a scar beneath his jaw in exactly the shape of a half-moon. He looked at Alaric. Alaric looked at him. The silence lasted approximately 4 seconds, which was as long as either of them could manage. "That is," the man said slowly, in the tone of someone testing a sentence before completing it, "a remarkable thing." "My name is Alaric Fenro," Alaric said. "I am told we share a mother." Calder Valor, for it was unmistakably him, stood up from the bench. He was a little taller than Alaric, perhaps, and his eyes were darker, and 12 years of imprisonment had carved lines in his face that Alaric's face did not have, but the shape was the same, the jaw, the scar, the set of the shoulders. "Fenro," Calder said. "North country. The very north. How long have you known?" 3 days. Alaric stepped into the room. "Your sister sends her love. She would be here except that someone needed to stay at the castle to prevent Lord Dreven from doing anything else he'll regret." Calder Valor sat back down on the bench. He covered his face with his hands for a moment. When he looked up, His expression was unreadable in the lamp's low light, and then it was not. It was the face of a man who had been holding himself together through an act of sustained will for 12 years, and who had just, in the space of one sentence, been told that it was over. "Seraphine," he said, "she's all right?" "She's magnificent," Alaric said, and meant it in every register of the word. The reunion at Ashenmere happened on the 22nd day. 8 days before the Crown's representative was due to arrive, Calder was carried through the gates, in a cart, because the horse they had brought him could not manage the last mile of road, and he would not hear of being carried. And the compromise was the cart. The villagers came out in the rain to watch, which was the kind of thing villages do when a story they have been living with for 12 years arrives at its ending. Seraphine met him at the steps. She stood at the top as she had stood when Alaric arrived 3 weeks earlier, but this time she did not maintain the composure of a woman who has learned to manage disappointment. This time, when her brother, recognizable in spite of everything, in spite of the years and the gauntness and the grief, looked up at her from the bottom of the steps, she came down them. The household watched, in the particular moved silence of people who have been waiting for something to be repaired and are watching it happen. Alaric stood to one side. He felt, watching them, something complicated a gladness that was entirely genuine and a loneliness that surprised him, because he had not known he was lonely until just now, standing outside a reunion that had nothing to do with him. Then Seraphine looked back over her shoulder and found him, and the expression on her face was the answer to a question he had not been sure he was permitted to ask. The days that followed were full of necessary things. Calder Valor's statement was written and witnessed. The documentation from the tunnel chest was collated and presented. Lord Oswin Dreven, confronted in the estate office by Calder, Seraphine, Alaric, and 2 of the Crown's preliminary officers who had arrived ahead of the formal representative, attempted 3 different explanations before abandoning the effort entirely. He was arrested on the afternoon of the 24th day and removed from Ashenmere in the manner of a man who had spent 15 years considering himself untouchable and was now reconsidering. Father Colin, who had been present for the arrest, said only, "God's patience is longer than ours, but it is not infinite," and returned to his prayers. The Crown's representative arrived on the 30th day, 1 hour before the deadline, to find a duchy that was in significantly better financial condition than the accounts had suggested 3 weeks earlier, thanks to the recovery of funds that Dreven had misdirected. A legal claimant to the title with a verified birth record extracted from the Duchess's sealed journal. And 2 men who looked so alike that the representative, a thin, methodical man named Comptroller Vache, spent the first 10 minutes of his visit simply looking between them. "There are 2 of you," Vache said. "There are," Calder agreed. "The title belongs to the elder." "The title belongs to Ashenwind," Calder said, "which is not the same thing." He looked at his brother. "I intend to name Alaric as co-steward of the duchy with full authority in my absence, and formal recognition as a member of the Valor family. The journal establishes his right. I would argue that his last 30 days establish his character." Alaric said, from across the room where he had stationed himself in the manner of a man who expects to be consulted less than he is, "You don't need to do that." "You rode into my duchy and saved it," Calder said. "You found the evidence that freed me. You protected my sister through a situation that would have broken most men." He paused. "I understand you also repaired the East Mill Bridge, reconciled 7 years of incorrect rent, and gave the kitchen staff their Sundays." The Sundays were overdue. Seraphine made the sound that was almost a laugh, and this time it became the full thing, and several people in the room, who had not heard her laugh in some years, turned to look. Comptroller Vache wrote in his ledger. "I'll need the full documentation for the birth record," he said, in the tone of a man retreating to what he knows. "And a formal statement from Father Colin. And someone will need to explain to me exactly what a Hollow King is and why there are 15 years of his correspondence in my evidence chest." "Sit down," Seraphine said. I'll have tea brought.